What's up, everybody? Happy Wednesday morning. This is Dodger Heads presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined this morning by Daniel Starkand to break down a huge deal that broke last night in the middle of a live show that we were doing. The Dodgers signed Blake Snell to a 5-year, $182 million deal. He was one of the top 4 to 7 free agents, depending on where you look. The guy the Dodgers had been linked to, Daniel. In the middle of our live show, you hopped on at halftime of the Lakers game. Anthony and I were there. This news broke. Now that you've had a little bit of time to digest and process this, where does your head go with the news that Blake Snell's a Dodger?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's great that the news dropped right in the middle of the live show last night, and I went and watched it back, and you and Anthony were literally talking about Blake Snell, and then you're like, wait a second, like, Blake tweeted out a picture of himself in a Dodger jersey, so that was incredible. I will say though, it is nice, like reacting to it live is great, obviously, and it makes for great content, but it is also nice to be able to digest it for a night and come back here in the morning and talk about it. And after I've been able to do that, like, I've only gotten more excited about this signing. Like, I think it's a perfect match here. Obviously, we know, that the Dodgers have had interest in Blake Snell for a while now, and it finally came to fruition, and we'll get into all the numbers and all that stuff. But I really think it's a great deal. And now the Dodgers rotation, they still have more work to do, but it's looking great.
Yeah, as it currently stands, the projected Dodgers starting rotation involves Blake Snell, Tyler Glasnow, Shohei Ohtani, and Yoshinobu Yamamoto at the top. All 4 of those guys could be number 1 starters. The Dodgers have 4 of them. I mean, literally the 4th guy on that list is the highest paid pitcher in Major League history in Yoshinobu Yamamoto. And then behind that, I'm including Kershaw on this list because I think it's assumed he will be back. But it's Kershaw, Dustin May, Tony Gonsolin, Landon Knack, and then even Emmett Sheehan, who's due back partway through the season. And you could keep going. Bobby Miller, Nick Frasso, Ben Kasparius, Justin Robleski are all other guys in the mix. And so that's where it stands. But in order to set up this morning's show, I figured I would kind of just ask 5 questions that get at the heart of the contract, why now, all that kind of thing. So let's start with the timing, Daniel. Why now? Why before Thanksgiving is Blake Snell? But both for the Dodgers, why have the Dodgers moved so quickly, do you think, on Blake Snell? And then secondly, why do you think Blake Snell was willing to be the first guy to kind of break the ice and agree to terms?
I'll start with Blake Snell because to me that's an easy reason, and we talked about this last night as well. Like, he was kind of the guy at the end of free agency last year who was left without a home, and that was coming off a Cy Young season, and then you see him sign with the Giants like in the middle of March or whatever it was. So he basically had no spring training, and his first half like sucked because of it, and he dealt with injuries, potentially because of that. And then obviously he came back and he was incredible in the second half. But looking at this from Blake Snell's perspective, he probably wanted to sign as early as possible here, and the fact that he got a deal of his liking, a long-term deal, like a lot of money, of course some deferred money in there as well, but it just made all the sense for him. And of course, everyone wants to play for the Dodgers right now. So if the Dodgers are giving you a market rate, offer, like, I don't see any of these guys really turning that down. And if you're looking at it from the Dodgers side, obviously we knew that they needed a top end starting pitcher. Like, that's all we've been talking about on our shows, pretty much comparing and contrasting which ones we like the best. And we all came to the same conclusion that the Dodgers did, I'm pretty sure, is that Blake Snell was kind of the best of the high level options here. So they went after him and they got him. And I think part of it is also, like, a lot of other teams are focused on Juan Soto right now, as they should be. And the Dodgers have some of their attention on that as well. But when a lot of those teams fall out of the Juan Soto sweepstakes, specifically like the Mets and Steve Cohen, like, they're going to want to spend their money elsewhere. And if the Dodgers would have waited here and let's say Snell's still on the board and Soto re-signs with the Yankees, like, Steve Cohen might have turned and said, hey, Blake Snell, like, here's $200 million over 5 years. And if you're the Dodgers, you don't necessarily want to get in a bidding war. So the fact that they were able to kind of lock this up, while everyone else is focused elsewhere and weren't really in a bidding war, I think worked out perfectly.
Yeah, I think the point you make on Snell is perfect. I mean, this is a guy who was the last guy at the dance with no date, basically. Shout out to the Giants, though, for signing him to a 1-year deal, giving up the qualifying offer picks, and then, as you pointed out on social media, winning nothing with that. So thank you for taking that bullet for the Dodgers, taking the qualifying offer, and then allowing him to just be an unrestricted free agent this time around. But as far as for the Dodgers, it's important to note there are more teams that need starting pitching than there are starting pitchers on the market. And so the Dodgers jumped at the guy who, they probably perceive to be the most desperate in Snell for all the reasons we just mentioned, but also a guy that they've been linked to. I mean, it's not rocket science to have connected the Dodgers to Blake Snell. A, they needed a top tier starting pitcher, and B, Snell is a guy that was drafted by Andrew Friedman, pursued by Andrew Friedman a year ago, pursued at the trade deadline last year. Like, you couldn't read an article about Blake Snell without somebody connecting him to the Dodgers, and yet the Dodgers actually go through. They actually put their money where their mouth was. They made the first offer. They came to an agreement, and he's off the board. You mentioned deferred money, so let's talk about question number 2. What is the contract actually, though? We know 5 years, $182 million, but it's the Dodgers. Surely there's some funky stuff here. Here's what we know. It's 5 years, $182. He gets a $52 million signing bonus, in part because he lives in an income-free state in Washington. So that's helpful for him. The CBT number is closer to 32 to 33 on average. The signing bonus is included in the AAV, so don't listen to all the Dodger on social media who don't understand how contract works. And I want to shout out Justin Lorber because there are deferred money here, but he pointed out, and nobody likes to talk about this unless it's the Dodgers, on average, 20 to 30% of these contracts are deferred nowadays, and he went through and listed out a bunch of the Red Sox contract and other teams that are deferring. Blake Snell's got 33% of his money deferred roughly in this contract. So the AAV for luxury tax purposes, again, is 32, 33. The actual money he's going to be making is about $36 million a year. I will say, Daniel, the Athletic projected 4 years and 110. MLB Trade Rumors predicted 5 years and 160. So this number on an actual dollars number comes in higher than both of those. Were you surprised at all by the 182 number?
I guess a little surprised just because in the Andrew Friedman era, we haven't really seen the Dodgers go out and spend on a big name free agent pitcher. Like, Yamamoto, I think, was kind of his own, separate thing just because of how young he was. But Blake Snell is going to be 32, by the time opening day rolls around. So giving him 5 years was a little surprising, but I think it's a deal that kind of makes sense for everyone. Blake gets the signing bonus, like you said. He lives in Washington, so he saves a little on the taxes there. And to be clear, like you said, for all the people who don't understand the CBT, that still counts against the AAV. Like, this isn't the NFL where you could restructure and push the money down the line or whatever. Like, that's not the case here. The signing bonus basically means nothing to the fans. Yeah. And like you said, with the deferrals, it's not like, they're saving 20 million bucks against the AAV. Like, they're saving 4 million. Like, it's really not that big of a deal, but it was a contract that worked out for everyone. And now the Dodgers, don't have to be as concerned about starting pitching, like getting another high level guy in there. I will say, like, when you go down the list of all their arms, every single guy has their own individual concerns. So you just hope that at least 5 of them could hold up until October. But we knew that the Dodgers were going to go after one of the big starting pitchers, and they paid market value for it. So credit to them.
Yeah, which leads to the next question. Is he that good? 5 years, $182 million for a guy who's going to be 32 next season. I'll throw some numbers at you that leave me encouraged, Daniel, and then you can fill in the gaps. Here's kind of the 2 things that Blake Snell is elite at. He is elite at getting swing and miss, and he is elite at keeping hitters away from hitting the ball hard off of him, which I don't know. I'm not claiming to be an expert here on pitching. That seems like a good combination, being able to get whiff and not allowing hard contact. He was 98th percentile in whiff rate for each of the last 2 years, 99th percentile in hard hit rate last year. That leads to a 98th percentile expected batting average, a 99th percentile expected slugging percentage. There's also this, when you look at Stuff Plus, he has one of the top 15 fastballs in all of Major League Baseball and one of the top 15 curveballs in all of Major League Baseball. We're going to get to the walks and all of that in just a second. But from a pure stuff, swing and miss, limiting hard contact perspective, Daniel, you could make a case he's one of the 3 or 4 best pitchers in all of baseball.
Yeah, he might be underrated if we're being honest, especially when you talk about what he kind of went through last offseason, not having that many suitors, coming off a Cy Young year, which is pretty crazy to think about. Not his first Cy Young, his second Cy Young.
Yeah.
Like, this is a guy who is really, like you said, he's a top 3 or 4 pitcher. And when you look at, like, I tweeted out his second half numbers last year, like after he went through the debacle of signing late, not having a spring training, not doing well to start the year, getting injured. After he came back, he was the best pitcher in baseball. I tweeted this from July 9th on, 14 starts. He was 5-0 with a 1.23 ERA, a 1.7 FIP. So it's not like he was getting lucky or anything. His WHIP was 0.78. And in 80 innings, he had 114 strikeouts.
Crazy.
So the swing and miss stuff, like you said, and only 30 walks, which, like you said, we're going to get into the walk issue. But if he's limiting it to that, which, 30 walks in 80 innings is still a solid amount. But the thing with him and the walks is that he doesn't give up hits. So if guys are getting on base, it's because of the walk. So if you took away half his walks and called them hits, like, I think everyone would be saying this guy's unquestionably, the best pitcher in baseball. So, the Dodgers are getting a true ace here. And you do worry about the age on probably the back half of that contract, because he is going to be 32 and it's 5 years. But if you get, 3 really good years out of him, I think you'll be okay with it.
Let's talk question number 4 about the walks and the injuries, because these are the 2 big questions that a lot of people have. Let's start with the injuries. In 2018, he threw 180 innings. Since, he has repeated that just one time. That was 2023. If we throw out 2020 and the shortened season, he's averaging 129 innings pitched per season over the last 5 years and just 25 starts, which isn't great. And yet, Eno Saris had this nugget. In the last 5 years, he has not had an elbow or shoulder injury at any point. Mostly has dealt with groin and adductor injuries. Only 46 pitchers have thrown more innings over the last 4 seasons than Blake Snell. So part of this is just a major league wide issue, not unique to Blake Snell. So on the injury side, we're going to get to walks in a second. On the injury side, again, no elbow or shoulder injuries in the last 5 years, but he is about to turn 32 and he has missed, about 10 starts a year, it feels like, for the last 4 or 5 years. So what's your level of concern on that front?
I think there's always a level of concern with any pitcher, whether like you could choose to interpret the information you just gave like however you want.
Yep.
Like we had this conversation pretty recently where it's like, if a guy's thrown 200 innings the last 3 years, like, that sounds like great news. He's super durable, but that also means that mileage is probably going to catch up with him at some point. So, you could look at the fact that he's only averaged 130 innings or whatever and say, that's a great thing. Like, there's not a whole lot of mileage on that arm, even though he's 32. Or you could say, he's probably going to get injured again, which is the case with pretty much all pitchers. Like, we know that as Dodger fans, like, all these guys are going to get injured. But when you're talking about, wanting to keep a guy healthy, having him in this rotation where they're probably going to run a 6-man rotation, like, no one's going to throw 200 innings in the regular season. Like, that's probably the best case scenario here. And there's no exact science to this, as every team in the MLB is finding out when it comes to pitcher injuries. Like we had, some guys saying they think, they're getting injured because they're not pitching enough. And obviously, sometimes they're throwing too much. So it's hard to predict if he's going to get injured or not, but I do think he's in the right environment where he's not going to be, overused or anything, and he should be able to stay fresh throughout the year. I think that should be good for him.
Yeah, and I think injury is the biggest concern that you have. I mean, it's very similar to Tyler Glasnow and the acquisition of him last year. I think injuries are the concern. The second thing a lot of people bring up, though, are walks. And the more I've read about Blake Snell and dug into people that, are watching him day by day and actually studying his pitching, I was fascinated, Daniel, at how little concern many of the smartest people in baseball have about Blake Snell's walks. And here's why. Driveline has a stat that's called Command Plus, and he's tied for 11th in Major League Baseball in Command Plus. One of the guys he's tied with is George Kirby, who is like notoriously believed to be like the best command in Major League Baseball. And Blake Snell grades out the same. Now, his walk rate is over 4 over the last 3 years. So how is that possible? There's a guy named Kyle Bland at Pitcher List. I want to give him a shout out. He created sort of a category that's called mistake pitches, pitches that generate fewer called or swinging strikes and have twice as many hits per pitch. And when he graded out mistake pitches, this is what he said in his conclusion. This is from 2023, after the 2023 season. This brings me back to Blake Snell. He refuses to throw mistakes. Only 3.2% of his pitches are classified as mistakes, while Yuri Perez was second in the category among pitchers with 1,500 pitches at 4.3%. Some of that has to do with him not hitting the strike zone. But even when we control for mistake pitches per zone pitch, he leads the league by a relatively wide margin. His strategy is to never miss in the middle of the zone, which will yield a high walk rate if you have even average control. But he knows that his stuff will allow him to generate strikeouts there. So basically, the reason he's walking guys is not because he's missing his spot. It's because he says, I would rather miss off the plate than in the middle of the plate. And he misses in the middle of the plate, Daniel, less than any pitcher in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, and look, you mentioned how his hard hit rate was among the best in the league as far as, the Baseball Savant, percentiles go. And that's a big reason for that. So, like, yeah, he is walking some people, but he's not giving up hits. He's not giving up hard contact. He's not giving up home runs. So, like, it's kind of like a no harm, no foul type of thing. Like, the main thing I will say it does hurt is a lot of times it hurts his pitch count. Like, there are a lot of Blake Snell starts where you look up in the 5th inning and he's at 89 pitches or whatever. But you also look up and there will be a 1 next to the opponent's, run category or something, So he's elite at preventing runs. And at the end of the day, that's the whole goal with this.
Yeah.
And I do think, look, the Dodgers will work with him. He already cut down on his walk rate, last year. The year he won the Cy Young, it was 5.0, which is absurdly high. This past year, his walks per 9 was 3.8. So he has had years where he has been able to limit the walks. And I think, the Dodgers will probably make some tweaks and whatnot. But like you said, he doesn't mind the walks because he's trying to avoid barrels and he's trying to avoid the middle of the plate where guys could really do damage. And he's shown that guys don't do damage off of him. So it is a little frustrating to watch when a guy's walking, 4 or 5 guys an outing. But if he's getting out of those jams and not giving up runs, like, so be it.
Yeah, think about a walk, like just on paper. You only get 1 base. Everybody else, if there's anybody on base, only moves up if it's a force. So there's no first to third situations when you're giving up a walk. And if you're Blake Snell, who gets more swing and miss than anybody in Major League Baseball, has a strikeout rate that's elite, and if guys happen to put the ball in play, which doesn't happen very often, it's the lowest quality of contact in all of Major League Baseball, then you're fine with giving guys a free base 3 or 4 times in a 5 or 6 inning stretch, which is what it works out to, because nobody's getting hits and nobody's hitting the ball hard. And so, to your point, I mean, who knows if the walk rate goes up or down, but basically what we know, as I was posting on Twitter today, you look at his batting average on balls in play, his walk rate, and his ERA, and a lot of people would look at those 3 numbers and say, this isn't sustainable. You can't sustain such a low batting average on balls in play, such a high walk rate, and still have a low ERA, ... unless you're Blake Snell, and unless you get the swing and miss that you get and limit the hard contact that you get. And now we found that it's sustainable. So let's move to the last question, which I think is the biggest question most Dodger fans are asking, maybe other than, is he actually good? Which is, what does this mean for Walker Buehler, Roki Sasaki, Jack Flaherty, and others? We speculated, Daniel, on our show last night. Most of us agreed. We didn't think this was going to change the interest in either Buehler or Sasaki. John Morosi did go on MLB Network this morning saying he believes the Dodgers will now be out, or probably Buehler will be gone, I believe was his language. I'm not sure if that's sourced information or if that's kind of connecting dots and saying surely they're not also going to sign Walker Buehler. But what do you think about how this impacts both Buehler and Sasaki?
I'll start with Sasaki because that's the easy one. Like, this has no impact on that, like, whatsoever. Like, Roki Sasaki is his own thing. Like, he's going to be making no money. So it's not like, oh, we spent all this money on Blake Snell, we can't afford Roki Sasaki. Like, that's not what it's about for him. The Dodgers will still very much be in the mix for Roki Sasaki, and it's pretty much just going to be up to Roki Sasaki as far as who he wants to play for. And I would imagine the fact that Blake Snell is on the Dodgers and they got that much better probably makes them more appealing to a guy like Roki Sasaki. And of course, they have the arms for a 6-man rotation, which he wants as well. So we'll see with that. And then Walker Buehler, I still kind of stand by what I said last night, which is it does, like, I wouldn't rule it out. I definitely would not rule it out. And I think it's going to be kind of up to Buehler, similar to Sasaki, I guess. But like, does Buehler want to sign right away? And if that's the case, it might not be the Dodgers, just because they might be waiting around for the next month and a half to see what happens with Roki Sasaki, and then if they don't land Sasaki, they might pivot elsewhere. But I think the thing about Buehler is he's probably not signing a long-term deal. Like, he's going to be a 1 or 2 year deal, which when you're talking, about the Dodgers, like, A, they love that, and B, it doesn't affect, the long-term outlook that much. So they would be willing to do that and maybe spend a little more for the next couple years. Just knowing that, hey, this is our window, like, we want to go for it. And of course, we all love Walker Buehler and would love to see him back. But if Walker is trying to lock down a 2 or 3 year deal within the next couple weeks, that's probably not happening with the Dodgers. But if he's willing to wait it out a little bit and kind of see how his market develops, see what other moves the Dodgers make, I definitely think they'll still be in the mix there. And, let's say the Dodgers don't land Roki Sasaki. I think they're going to need at least one more starting pitcher. So why not Walker Buehler? And if it's not him, they probably just kind of pivot to another 1 year type deal, like an innings eater type, like similar to the move they made with James Paxton last year. And obviously that didn't work out too well, but sometimes you just need an innings eater. And the fact that James Paxton was able to eat 90 innings or whatever it was in the first half of the year when pretty much everyone else was hurt, like that provides value, even if they're not great innings. So I think the Dodgers are still going to be in the starting pitching market. They're still very much involved in Roki Sasaki. But we haven't talked about the other big names, but I think they're out on all those guys as well. It's safe to say, like Jack Flaherty, Max Fried, Corbin Burns, like none of those guys will be Dodgers, I would imagine.
Yeah, I agree. Nothing to add on Sasaki. He's his own category, and nothing is going to impact whether the Dodgers are able to land him. I tend to agree with you on Buehler still as well, that I think the Dodgers are still going to be interested. I think Buehler is kind of, in many ways, for the same reasons they love Kike Hernandez. He's just a proven playoff performer. I think the Dodgers have learned over their sort of 3-year drought of no World Series trophies in 21, 22, and 23 that you just can't undervalue guys that perform in the big moments and in the postseason. Obviously, Walker Buehler has been that. And so I think, to your point, if Walker Buehler is interested in coming back to the Dodgers, and as long as there's not some crazy offer out there, I think the Dodgers are going to be in it until the end with Walker Buehler, and that ultimately the decision will rest with him. That's just a guess. It's possible Morosi has more information and is actually reporting basically that the Dodgers were going to pivot to Buehler if they couldn't get a guy like Blake Snell, but remains to be seen on that front. So there's your 5 questions on Blake Snell. Why now? What's the contract? Is he good? What about the walks and the injuries? And what does this mean for Walker Buehler and Roki Sasaki? We appreciate everybody for joining us here. Again, if you missed last night's live show, you can jump to the 49-minute mark. Somebody in the comments was nice enough to tag it. 49 on the dot. You'll see Anthony Witrado and I reacting live to news that Blake Snell was going to be a Dodger. And then we had another hour's worth of content with Daniel hopping on, and then Matt hopping on, and Blake hopping on. And so tons of content to get there. Of course, you can check DodgerBlue.com for all the latest. Thank you for joining us. That's Daniel Starkand. I am Jeff Spiegel. As always, please subscribe, ring the notification bell in the comments. Leave us a comment in the comments below. Enjoy the rest of your day. As always, go Dodgers.